I knew something was wrong the moment my boss started using my coworker's name like a verb. Derek it. That's a Derek level turnaround. We needed someone to own this, and Derek owned it. The worst part is, I'm the one who built the thing they were celebrating. I'm not saying I'm some tortured genius, or the only competent person in the room. I'm just the guy who keeps the reports from lying by accident. I clean data, I reconcile numbers, I flag weirdness before it becomes a disaster in a meeting. It's boring work, and I've always been fine with that. But over the last 3 months, my manager, Paul, started acting like Derek was single-handedly saving our department. And Derek, who had been on the team less than a year, leaned into it like he'd invented gravity. We worked in a mid-sized company that sold B2B subscriptions. My team handled performance reporting for sales ops. That meant we took a messy pile of CRM data, billing records, and marketing attribution and turned it into the truth. Leadership used to make decisions. If the truth was wrong, someone got yelled at. If the truth was right, everyone pretended it had always been obvious. Derek's job title was revenue analyst. Mine was reporting specialist. On paper, we were peers. In reality, I was the one who knew where every number came from, and Derek was the one who knew how to talk about numbers like he'd just returned from war. He had this smooth, confident way of speaking that made people relax. He used phrases like quick win, low-hanging fruit, North Star metric. He would take a simple fix, like removing duplicate leads from a pipeline report, and present it like a strategic breakthrough. Paul loved him for it. The first time I felt that cold little drop in my stomach was during a Monday stand-up. We were on Zoom, even though we sat 15 feet apart, because that's what our company did. Paul was running the meeting with his camera on, smiling like he'd had a great weekend. Derek sat back in his chair, coffee mug half smirk. Paul said, "Before we get into blockers, I want to call out Derek. The Q3 performance dashboard has been night and day. Leadership noticed. Great work." Derek nodded once, like a humble athlete accepting applause. "Appreciate it. Just making it cleaner, telling the story better." I waited for Paul to say something like, "And shout out to you too," or "Thanks to the team," or even just "Good collaboration." That's usually how these things go when someone is being praised for a shared output. Instead, Paul looked straight at me and said, "This is what I mean about ownership. Derek owns it. We need more of that." Then he moved on. I sat there staring at my own reflection in the corner of the Zoom window and realized I was doing that thing where you hold your face neutral so nobody can accuse you of being emotional. Like a reaction would be proof I didn't deserve credit. After the call, Derek walked by my desk and tapped the corner of my monitor like we were friends. "Good stuff," he said. "The dashboard's finally readable." Finally readable. That dashboard was built on a set of SQL queries I wrote last year after we got burned in a quarterly review. I had spent weekends rewriting logic, matching timestamps, and building an audit tab that traced every KPI to a source table. Derek didn't finally anything. He'd changed the colors, moved a few tiles, and renamed a section to Executive Summary. But I told myself the same thing I always told myself. Pick your battles. Let the work speak. Keep your head down. That lasted until the next week, when Paul forwarded an email to our entire group thread. The subject line was, "Fantastic insights. Thank you, Derek." It was from the VP of Sales, and the attachment was my analysis, not even reworded, my phrasing, my chart, my notes in the margin. The only difference was the file name Derek had saved it under. Derek Q3 Insights Final. That's when I stopped feeling annoyed and started feeling stupid, because it wasn't just happening. It was happening easily. I went back through Slack and email, and once I noticed the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. Derek would ask a quick question. I'd answer with detail, and a few hours later, Paul would repeat my answer in a meeting, with Derek's name attached. Derek would volunteer to present something that I had built, and Paul would beam at him like a proud dad. And Paul wasn't malicious. That was the problem. Paul genuinely believed Derek was the driver. Derek spoke like a driver. Derek looked like a driver. I looked like the guy quietly fixing the engine while everyone clapped for the person holding the steering wheel. Then Paul scheduled a performance alignment meeting with the whole department and 2 directors. Calendar title: Q3 numbers plus next steps. Mandatory. And in the invite description, Paul wrote one line: Derek will walk us through the improvements. I read that sentence 3 times, and something in me went very still. Because the numbers weren't just a slide. They were my work, my reputation, and the only thing protecting me in a company that loved confident voices more than accurate ones. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't confront Derek. I didn't go to HR. I didn't even complain to a coworker. I opened the dashboard, clicked into the back-end tabs, and started pulling the raw exports the same way I always did. Except this time, I saved everything twice. Once in the shared drive, like normal, and once in a private folder with timestamps, version history, and the exact query outputs that fed every single improvement Derek had been praised for. By the time I finished, my hands weren't shaking. I was calm, and I wasn't guessing anymore. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. The week before the meeting was when Derek stopped pretending we were equals. He started looping me into threads late after decisions were already aligned. He'd ping me with messages like, "Can you sanity check this real quick?" and then forward my response upward without context, trimming out the parts that showed how much work had already been done. One afternoon, Paul stood behind my chair while I was working. "What are you on right now?" he asked, casual. "Reconciling pipeline variants for EMEA," I said. "There's a lag between close date and billing that's skewing—" Yeah, he cut in, nodding like he understood. Derek mentioned something like that. He's really got a handle on the story. That word again. Story. After Paul walked away, Derek slid into the chair across from my desk without asking. "Hey," he said quietly, "just a heads up. Leadership's pretty excited. This meeting is kind of my moment, you know?" I looked at him. "Your moment?" He smiled, friendly, rehearsed. "I mean, I've been the face of the improvements. It'd be weird to muddy that now." Muddy. Like accuracy was a nuisance. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I just nodded once and turned back to my screen. That night, at home, I opened my laptop again. I rebuilt the entire Q3 narrative from scratch, not to improve it, but to understand it the way leadership saw it. Every metric Derek had highlighted had one thing in common. It depended on how attribution was framed. Lead source credit windows, revenue recognition cutoffs, active versus engaged accounts. None of it was fake. That's what made it dangerous. Derek wasn't inventing numbers. He was choosing versions that made his changes look transformative, and my groundwork invisible. I pulled commit histories from our shared repository. Every query edit had a timestamp. I pulled CRM change logs that showed when filters were adjusted and by whom. I exported raw tables and recreated the dashboards in parallel using pre-Derek logic and post-Derek logic side by side. By midnight, I had something clear and terrifying. The turnaround wasn't performance. It was presentation. The next morning, Paul sent another email. Subject: Final run-through today. Derek presenting. I replied with one sentence. Happy to join in case there are questions on data lineage. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. In the run-through, Derek shared his screen and walked through the slides like a TED Talk. He talked about strategic reframing and executive-level clarity. Paul nodded along. One of the directors smiled. I stayed quiet. At one point, Derek clicked into the dashboard's audit tab, the one I'd built months ago and he'd never touched before. "This part's mostly legacy," he said quickly, scrolling past it. "Not super relevant." I watched him skip the very thing that could unravel everything. After the call, a coworker messaged me privately. "Hey man, are you okay with this?" I typed back, then deleted it. Typed again. "I'm okay being patient. I wrote. I'm not okay being erased. That afternoon, I added one last thing to my folder, a clean export of the dashboard with every metric tied to its source, annotated in plain English. Not accusatory, not emotional, just factual. Who built what, when it was built, what changed, why it mattered. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was planning for questions. Because I knew something else, too. Something Derek didn't. Leadership didn't care about him. They cared about the numbers. And in that meeting, the numbers were finally going to speak for themselves. That was the moment I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. Something changed after the run-through. Not in the room, but in me. I stopped thinking about fairness and started thinking about outcomes. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Derek wasn't stealing credit in secret. He was doing it in public, with confidence, because it worked. The system rewarded whoever spoke last and loudest, not whoever built the foundation. And Paul wasn't blind. He was busy, which in practice meant the same thing. 2 days before the meeting, Paul sent me a message. Quick favor, can you send Derek the raw EMEA tables? He wants to double-check something before Thursday. I stared at that line for a long time. Those tables were the spine of the entire dashboard. They weren't dangerous on their own, but in the wrong framing, they could be used to justify almost any narrative. That's how Derek had been operating. Never lying, just steering. I replied, sure. I'll include the context notes. Paul didn't respond. Derek did almost instantly. Perfect. Thanks, man. This is going to land really well. Land. I sent the files, but not the way Derek expected. Along with the tables, I included a short readme. Neutral tone. No accusations. Just explanations. This table reflects pre-attribution adjustments. This metric shifts based on close-state logic. Any variance above X% is typically timing, not performance. It was the kind of documentation people skip when they're confident they already understand things. Derek didn't acknowledge it. The day before the meeting, I finally slept badly. Not because I was nervous, because I was replaying every possible way this could go wrong. I imagined Derek pivoting smoothly if challenged. I imagined Paul stepping in to keep things high level. I imagined leadership deciding this was all too technical and defaulting back to vibes. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Buried in the dashboard was a metric Derek had been spotlighting heavily: net new revenue efficiency. He loved it because it looked clean and upward. Simple ratio. Great story. Except the way it was calculated quietly excluded churned accounts from the denominator for a specific window. A change Derek had suggested weeks ago to reduce noise. I pulled the historical view. Before that change, the metric was flat. After it, it jumped. Not because performance improved, but because the frame narrowed. It wasn't fraud. It wasn't even unethical on paper. But it was selective truth. And selective truth collapses the moment someone asks the wrong question. So I prepared for that question. I built a mirror version of the dashboard, same visuals, same layout. One difference: every metric was toggled back to its original definition, with footnotes explaining the logic. No opinion, no commentary. Just before and after reality. Thursday morning, I walked into the conference room with my laptop and a calm I didn't recognize. Derek was already there, pacing lightly, rehearsing under his breath. Paul was joking with one of the directors. Coffee cups. Small talk. Familiar rituals. No one looked at me like I was part of the story, which was fine, because I wasn't there to tell a story. I was there to answer questions. The meeting started exactly how I expected. Derek took the floor. Slides up. Confident voice. He talked about momentum, clarity, cleaning up legacy issues. He gestured toward graphs I knew better than my own handwriting. Paul smiled. The directors nodded. Then one of them, a woman from finance who hadn't spoken once so far, leaned forward slightly. "Can you clarify something?" she asked. "This efficiency metric, when did the definition change?" The room went quiet in that subtle way that means something has shifted. Derek didn't look at me. He didn't look at the dashboard. He smiled and said, "We refined it earlier this quarter to better reflect real performance." She nodded slowly. "Do we have a view of it before the refinement?" Derek hesitated, just long enough. "I don't have that pulled up," he said. But directionally, it was, "I do," I said, not loudly, not sharply, just present. Everyone turned. I didn't wait for permission. I opened my laptop, connected to the screen, and pulled up the mirrored dashboard. Same graph, different truth. "This is the same metric," I said calmly, using the prior definition. "The change happened on this date, and the lift coincides exactly with the adjustment." No one interrupted. I continued, steady. "Both versions are valid, but they tell different stories. The improvement here is mostly reclassification, not net gain." Paul stopped smiling. Derek finally looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't have a line ready. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. And that's when I understood something else, too. This wasn't about beating Derek. This was about making it impossible for anyone to pretend they didn't know. And then, silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Not Paul, not Derek, not the directors. The screen still showed the two dashboards side by side, identical except for the footnotes and the numbers that refused to agree with the story. Everyone had just applauded. The finance director didn't look at Derek. She looked at Paul. "So the improvement we flagged in Q3, she said evenly, is largely definitional." Paul cleared his throat. "It looks like some of it is." I stayed quiet. This wasn't my turn to talk anymore. Another director leaned forward. "How much?" I answered before Derek could. "Roughly 60 to 70%, depending on region. The remainder is real lift. Mostly from timing normalization we implemented earlier this year." Earlier this year, before Derek. Derek tried to jump in. "To be clear, we never hid that change. It was about clarity. Leadership needs cleaner signals." The finance director nodded. "Clarity is good, but comparability matters more." She turned back to the screen. "Why wasn't the prior definition shown alongside the new one?" Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. Paul glanced at him, waiting. "I didn't think it was necessary," Derek said finally. "It would have distracted from the progress." Progress. Paul leaned back in his chair for the first time since the meeting started. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse. Recalculating. "Who made the call to change the definition?" he asked. "I suggested it," Derek said, "but it was a team effort." Paul's eyes flicked to me. "Was it?" I didn't embellish. "The change was discussed. I flagged the trade-offs in Slack and noted it should be shown as a reframe, not a performance gain." I clicked once and pulled up the message. Timestamp. Channel. No commentary. Paul exhaled slowly. The room shifted again. Not dramatically, but decisively. Laptops opened. Notes were taken. The conversation stopped being about Derek's momentum and started being about governance. The VP of sales, who had joined late and missed the praise-filled beginning, finally spoke. "So what else falls into this category?" he asked. "What looks like performance but isn't?" I answered calmly, because I'd already done the work. I walked them through 3 more examples, not as accusations, as reconciliations. Every time I explained why the metric had been adjusted, what problem it solved, and what illusion it created if viewed alone. No emotion, no edge, just cause and effect. Derek stopped trying to interrupt. He sat very still, hands clasped, eyes locked on the table like it might open and swallow him. Paul rubbed his temple. "Why am I seeing this for the first time?" No one answered. After the meeting ended, leadership stayed behind. Derek left without looking at me. Paul asked me to stay. The room felt smaller without the audience. "I need to understand something," Paul said, quieter now. "Why didn't you come to me earlier?" I met his eyes. I assumed you'd ask the questions when it mattered. He nodded slowly. And Derek? I chose my words carefully. Derek's good at presenting outcomes. I'm good at building systems. We were rewarded for different things. Paul didn't argue. That told me enough. Later that afternoon, an email went out from finance. Subject: temporary hold on Q3 performance narratives. By the end of the day, Derek was removed from presenting anything externally. By the end of the week, his access to the reporting layer was restricted pending review. No announcement, no drama, just permissions quietly disappearing. The final blow came a week later, during a smaller meeting I wasn't even invited to. Paul told me about it afterward, voice flat. Derek had tried to defend himself by saying everyone reframed data, that this was normal, that I was being overly literal. Finance asked him one question. Can you walk us through the logic without the slides? He couldn't. Not because he was stupid, but because he'd never built the thing he was describing. That was the moment trust broke. Not with a bang, with a realization. And once trust is gone in a room full of people who live by numbers, it doesn't come back. Derek was reassigned temporarily, then quietly exited the company 2 weeks later. His farewell message was polite, vague, and full of gratitude. Paul never mentioned him again. The dashboard stayed. So did my audit tabs. And for the first time since I joined the company, no one asked me to keep it high level. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. The week after Derek left was quieter than I expected. No gossip, no victory laps, just a subtle shift in how people spoke during meetings, like everyone had agreed to lower their voice. Paul scheduled a one-on-one with me the following Monday. No agenda, which used to mean trouble. This time it didn't. I owe you an apology, he said before I even sat down. Not for missing credit, for not asking better questions sooner. I didn't rush to forgive him. I didn't need to. He continued anyway. We're moving reporting under finance, he said. They want someone who understands lineage, not just presentation. They asked for you by name. That was it. No dramatic praise, no speech about teamwork, just a concrete change. 2 weeks later, my title changed. So did my manager. So did the way people interacted with my work. When someone asked for a metric, they asked where it came from before asking what it meant. When a slide went to leadership, the audit tab stayed visible. No one called it a lesson, but everyone learned. The strangest part was Derek's absence, not because I missed him, because the space he left behind revealed how much noise he'd been filling. Meetings ended faster, fewer adjectives, more questions, less theater. One afternoon, the finance director stopped by my desk. You did the right thing, she said, and you did it the right way. I nodded. That was enough. I still do the same work. I still clean data. I still build things most people will never look at. The difference is now, when the numbers come up, they don't belong to anyone's ego. They just are. And that's the quiet kind of ending you don't brag about, but you sleep very well with.